the cutting-edge technical tool that could save freedom of speech and, more importantly, save lives. The Defense Enabling Assistance Framework, or DEAF protection, has proven to be the state-of-the-art digital communications security technology and is so powerful and stealthy that governments have gone to great lengths to protect it. Visit us at defprotection.com. That's defprotection.com.
If you are watching this video, then we have piqued your curiosity in watching the most factual true crime series on YouTube. True Crime, Man's Dark Imagination. And now, here is your host, Alan Dutroux.
Imagine a very important court case being handed to a new judge with the facts of the case being either misrepresented or not even related to the jurist at all. Also imagine a case where, because of the ineptness of the investigators, they enabled the perpetrator to commit even more heinous crimes before he was captured. And what about a case so important and horrendous that those in power at the time feared the outcome and the testimony of the persons charged? In 2004, a man came to trial who appeared to have been the leader of a human trafficking ring in Belgium that preyed on young children. Questions arose as to why he was allowed to operate for so long before being apprehended and standing trial for his crimes along with his accomplices. Was he protected from powers unseen? On June 24, 1995, two 8-year-old girls, Melissa Rousseau and Julie Lejeune, were kidnapped outside of their homes while they played at a local playground in Chaleroi, Belgium. Rousseau and Lejeune were kept in an underground bunker, so to speak, where they were repeatedly sexually abused by their assailant and subsequently starved to death. The killer had no remorse nor no sense of mercy as he later buried the two girls in the garden of one of his many houses that he owned, where authorities, after a rabid public clamor, decided to take action. The two young girls would be the first in a string of disappearances involving a sexual sadist who managed to delay any investigations into his crimes due to the infighting of law enforcement officials within the French and Flemish communities of the country. Eventually, this case would gain worldwide attention as the persons accused seemed to have connections in high places and dodged any punishment for their heinous crimes. It appeared to be a wide-ranging conspiracy, and the investigation ran into many entanglements along the way, stifling justice for the victims and unbearable frustration for the parents. The individual responsible for these disappearances and later slayings was born Marc Dutroux on November 6, 1956, in the town of Ijsels, Belgium. The oldest of 5 children, Dutroux's parents made a living as teachers, and when Dutroux reached the age of 4, his parents emigrated to the Belgian Congo to help educate children there. But when the Congo crisis arose starting in 1960, a period of mass political upheaval and strife, Dutroux's parents moved back to Belgium, where they resumed their careers. Dutroux's mother and father divorced in 1971, and the young man decided to stay with his mother. His mother denigrated Dutroux to the point where he left home and lived on the streets, supporting himself through performing homosexual acts on any men who would pay for the service. Dutroux eventually married at the age of 19, and that marriage ended in divorce after the couple had 2 children. During his first marriage, Dutroux had an affair with one Michel Martin, whom he would later marry and father 3 children by her. Dutroux was unemployed most of his adult life, even though he had trained as an electrician. Because of his unemployment, he took to the streets to support himself and his family by stealing cars, dealing in drugs, and muggings. Dutroux also involved himself in other criminal activities, such as stealing cars in Belgium and driving them to other countries such as Czechoslovakia and Hungary. All of these activities allowed the criminal to live in relative comfort in his native Chaleroi, Belgium. He owned 7 small houses in the area, most of them vacant, yet he used 3 of them for a most dastardly and cruel practice. Dutroux's more violent criminal behavior is said to have begun in February 1986. Dutroux and Martin had been kidnapping and raping young girls, a crime for which Dutroux stood convicted in April 1989. The court sentenced the rapist to 13 years in prison for the offenses, but he only served 5 with early release for good behavior in April 1992. An interesting facet about this incident is that Dutroux's mother wrote a letter to the prison director where she stated that her son had been keeping young girls captive in his house. The authorities ignored the mother's assertions. Also, after his release, Dutroux conned a psychiatrist into diagnosing the ex-convict with a disability, therefore making Dutroux eligible for a government pension. In addition to his diagnosed condition, the ex-convict was prescribed sedatives and sleeping pills, narcotics he would later use in his diabolical plans. The 2 girls who had been kidnapped on June 24, 1995, Melissa Rousseau and Julie Lejeune, were taken shortly after Dutroux's release from prison. After kidnapping the girls, Dutroux drugged them and placed them in his dungeon. Over the course of a few weeks, the assailant tortured them sexually, eventually leaving their care to his wife, Michelle Martin, who failed to feed the girls any nourishment. Thus, they succumbed to malnutrition. On August 22, 1995, Dutroux kidnapped 17-year-old Anne Marchal and 19-year-old F.J. Lambrex, who had been enjoying a vacation in the seaside town of Ostend. But with these 2 girls, Dutroux had an accomplice in the guise of his friend Michel Lelivre, who Dutroux paid for his services with drugs. Because the dungeon was occupied by Rousseau and Lejeune already, Dutroux chained Marchal and Lambrex to beds within his house where he resided with his wife, Martin. She was aware of his actions and his intentions with the young girls. In late 1995, authorities arrested Dutroux for his involvement in a luxury car theft ring. Police held him in custody for over 3 months as Dutroux sat incarcerated from December 6, 1995 to March 20, 1996. On December 13th, police searched Dutroux's residence and 6 days later with regards to the car theft. Melissa Rousseau and Julie Lejeune whimpered and cried, but the police searching the Dutroux residence claimed to have heard nothing while they were there. Michel Martin, while Dutroux sat in jail, fed the German Shepherd dogs but failed to feed Rousseau and Lejeune. Martin later claimed that she was too scared to go down to the dungeon. As a result, Rousseau and Lejeune starved to death, and Dutroux and Lelivre buried the 2 girls within garbage bags in the back garden. On May 28, 1996, Dutroux and Lelivre kidnapped 12-year-old Sabine Dardin while on her way to school. The kidnappers placed Dardin in the dungeon, as was the practice. On August 9, 1996, Dutroux and Lelivre kidnapped 14-year-old Laetitia Delhay as she walked home from a swimming pool. Later, the 2 imprisoned the young girl in the dungeon. This time, an eyewitness saw Dutroux's van, described it to the police, and identified part of the license plate. Dutroux, Lelivre, and Martin were later arrested, and after a search of the house, authorities found nothing. But something unexpected occurred. Dutroux and Lelivre confessed. Subsequent to this confession, Dutroux led police to the basement dungeon where Dardin and Delhay were found barely alive on August 15, 1996. Several years later, Dardin gave an interview where she stated that Dutroux told the young girl that she had been kidnapped by a gang and that her parents did not want to pay the ransom demand. The gang planned to kill the girl, but Dutroux convinced Dardin that he saved her from that fate. Dutroux allowed Dardin to write letters to her family, but he never mailed them. On August 17, 1996, Dutroux led investigators to another one of his houses where he buried the bodies of Rousseau and Lejeune. But the police made a grisly discovery along with the corpses of the two girls. Another body, that of a man who was later identified as Bernard Weinstein, one of Dutroux's former accomplices. A later autopsy on the young girls determined that they died from starvation. Weinstein, on the other hand, Dutroux tortured by squeezing his testicles and demanding money. Dutroux later drugged the accomplice and buried him alive. In a later confession, Dutroux informed the police where they would find the bodies of Anne Marchal and F.J. Lambrex. On September 3, 1996, investigators located the bodies of the two girls in Jumet in Hainaut, buried under a shack next to a house that Dutroux owned. Later knowledge divulged that the dead man Weinstein lived in the house on that property 3 years before his death. A more detailed search of Dutroux's properties revealed numerous pornographic tapes, some self-acted and produced with Dutroux and his wife Michelle as the stars. When Dutroux's alleged crimes came to light, the authorities drew a great deal of criticism due to the fact that several preceding incidents occurred where law enforcement could have stopped Dutroux, but it appeared they simply ignored the signs. In one instance, the accused child slayer offered money to a police informant to provide Dutroux with girls to keep in a dungeon he was building in his basement. In addition to the first letter that Dutroux's mother wrote to the prison officials regarding his activities involving young girls, she wrote another letter to police and notified them that he held girls in all of his houses. Again, law enforcement proved incompetent and ignored the letter, even from someone as close as his mother. Later information came to light that police already had Dutroux under surveillance at the time of the Marchal and Lambrex disappearances. However, police only programmed the camera to operate between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. The search of Dutroux's residence and automobile on December 13, 1995, came under closer analysis. At this time, as stated previously, Melissa Rousseau and Julie Lejeune were in the basement and left undiscovered. However, police were not searching the residence looking for kidnapping victims, but rather items regarding car theft. Had they been furnished with dogs or other equipment designed to detect fake walls and floors, perhaps they would have discovered the young girls earlier and saved their lives. Even with that defense, police failed to see the freshly plastered and painted wall that concealed the dungeon. Furthermore, a locksmith that accompanied the police to the residence and went into the basement close to the dungeon claimed that he heard the cries of young girls, but the police dismissed a more thorough search of the premises, including the basement. Authorities concluded that the cries probably came from the street and echoed among the alleys of the neighborhood before finally being heard in the echo chamber of the Dutroux basement. This proved unacceptable as the entire nation of Belgium had become engaged in a wholesale search for the two girls once authorities determined they were missing. In searching the house further after his confessions, authorities also discovered videotapes of Dutroux constructing the secret entrance to the dungeon and the dungeon itself. The police claimed they never viewed the tapes later because they did not have a VCR to view them. With the behavior and the ineptness of the police within this investigation, those observers at the time believed there was a cover-up. But why would the police cover up a run-of-the-mill child murderer? Dutroux made a claim that he was just the middleman in a child sex ring which involved high-ranking members of Belgian police and the government. The Belgian people as a whole were very angry over the lack of speed with which the police pursued any clues to find the girls sooner. And perhaps Rousseau and Lejeune may have survived if the police had not dragged their feet throughout the whole affair. To add insult to injury, and substantiating the general suspicion that a cover-up was afoot. The investigating judge who presided over the case, Jean-Marc Dutroux, was relieved of judiciary duties with the official reason for removal from the case was that he had previously attended a fundraiser dinner for Rousseau and Lejeune's parents. The investigation itself had been wrapped up with the official reason being due to a conflict of interest. As a result of Judge Chalerot's removal, a massive protest, the likes of which had never been seen, over 300,000 Belgians descended on the capital of Brussels demanding judicial and police reform. The angered crowds wanted justice for the girls as well as any other information that Dutroux possessed in order to expose what many believed to be a vast network of pedophiles operating in their country unchallenged. An interesting facet of the case came when Judge Chalerot testified on the witness stand for an inquiry into his recusal, where he stated, "The bulletproof vehicles and armed guards needed to protect him against the shadowy figures determined to stop the full truth coming out. Never before in Belgium has an investigating judge at the service of the king been subjected to such pressure. We were told by police that murder contracts had been taken out against the magistrates." The honorable jurist tacitly confirmed some of the fears of those observers of the Dutroux case. The investigation was seriously hampered by protection of suspects by people in the government. Rarely so much energy had been spent opposing an inquiry, Judge Chalerot alleged, and he also alleged that the mafia had taken control of the case. Dutroux, by his own admission, stated that he was protecting people in high positions of government and the police system, and the path that the investigation took, it seemed as though Dutroux spoke the truth. However, a parliamentary commission conducted an investigation for over 17 months and reached the conclusion in February 1998 that, while Dutroux did not have accomplices in high places in police and justice systems, he profited from corruption, sloppiness, and incompetence. It seemed easier to blame incompetence and malfeasance of the investigating body, and then to admit some far-reaching conspiracy that involved those in power. The public, already enraged at the findings of the commission, became livid when Dutroux had been transferred to a courthouse without handcuffs, overpowered one of his guards, stole his weapon, and escaped. All throughout Europe, in France, Luxembourg, Germany, and Belgium, placed their law enforcement on high alert, especially at the borders. Fortunately, authorities captured the accused pedophile and child murderer just a few hours later. Citizens in Europe still wondered why a man so dangerous and possibly connected could have escaped from such a high-security situation. As a result of this escape attempt, several high-situated officials within the Belgian government resigned. Stéphane de Klerk, Minister of Justice, Johan van de Lannotte, and the police chief of Brussels all resigned. Dutroux received a 5-year sentence for threatening a police officer during his escape, and in 2002, he received a 5-year sentence for other unrelated crimes. The trial for the murders of Melissa Rousseau, Julie Lejeune, and Bernard Weinstein began on March 1, 2004, 7 years after Dutroux's initial arrest. 450 people were called to serve on the jury, and after a screening process that was very stringent, the court finally chose a jury of the defendant's peers. The trial took place in the capital of the Belgian province of Luxembourg, Arlon. During the interrogations that took place well before the trial, Dutroux admitted readily to the abductions, yet steadfastly denied murdering Marshal, Lambrechts, and Weinstein, in addition to the other victims, Melissa Rousseau and Julie Lejeune, even though he admitted to murdering Weinstein. The court also charged Dutroux with an assortment of other crimes including, but not limited to, auto theft, abduction, attempted murder, attempted abduction, molestation, and 3 unrelated rapes of women in Slovakia. Also tried as accomplices were Dutroux's wife, Michel Martin, Michel Lalivre, and another man, Michel Nihou. Because of the publicity surrounding the trial and the enraging nature of the charges and those charged, the defendants were made to sit in a glass cage for their protection. The case so inflamed the public that the press would not allow any photos of Dutroux taken at the trial to be printed in the newspapers, even though the commission report failed to recognize whether Dutroux had connections to high police and government officials. The defendant maintained that he was part of a larger, more internationally adept child smuggling and human trafficking ring. Police subsequently learned during the long investigation that not only did Dutroux support his family through selling stolen automobiles and other petty crimes, he sold some women into human slavery throughout Europe. One must ask the question as to whom may have been his customers, per se. After all, he did own 7 houses and provided for a family of 5. The costs of supporting such a family do not come cheap, and with the most recent arrests of human traffickers throughout the United States, Europe, and the world, one has to wonder why, if Dutroux belonged to an international pedophile ring, why he was not well protected, as he may have turned state's evidence and given up the whole operation. Perhaps prison was the safest place for him at the time, but the public still felt that he and his other minions were merely a small part of the larger pie. After 3 months of testimony and trial, the jury went into seclusion to consider their verdict on defendant Marc Dutroux. On June 17, 2004, the jury found Dutroux, Martin, and Lelivre guilty on all charges. The jury could not reach a verdict on whether Michel Nicroux was involved or not. On June 22, 2004, the judge sentenced Dutroux to the maximum for all charges on which he stood convicted, life imprisonment. Michel Martin received 30 years. Michel Lelivre received 25 years. Michel Nicroux, although acquitted on the more serious charges, received 5 years in prison for drug-related offenses. After serving 13 years into her sentence, a court released Michel Martin from prison on August 19, 2012, despite a protest of almost 2,000 people who wanted Martin to continue her incarceration. On February 4, 2013, Dutroux petitioned a court in Brussels to grant him an early release from prison. The convict claimed that he was no longer dangerous and desired a release to go under house arrest. On the 18th of February, the court steadfastly denied the request. Because of this conviction and the publicity surrounding the horrific events perpetrated by Marc Dutroux, because the surname is so popular, more than 1/3 of all Belgians petitioned their local courts to have their names changed to alleviate any confusion with the convicted killer. As a result of the Dutroux case and the accusations which sprang from the investigation, debates on human trafficking occurred within the European Parliament. Once the results of those debates culminated in the Daphne Initiative, it allocated generous funds to organizations not affiliated with the government to work against human trafficking and violence against women. Even though Dutroux may have been convicted of the murders of 5 people, during the investigation, during the trial, and immediately after, accusations arose, specifically admissions made by Dutroux himself, that he may have been responsible for more disappearances than authorities first believed. One of the disappearances in particular, that of 12-year-old Lubna Banesa, took center stage as her older sister demanded more information about her siblings' disappearance in 1992. It took the older sister 5 years, writing a book, and causing a media stir before the authorities actually looked for her sister. In 1997, Lubna's body was found not more than 200 yards away from her home. It turned out that a local mechanic, also a registered sex offender, sexually abused Lubna and then kept her body in a trunk not too far from the garage where the mechanic worked. The press seems to have some culpability in the reason why the Dutroux case seemed to have been part of a cover-up conspiracy. When the news of Dutroux's handiwork reached the press, they made the claim that this was the first time that Belgians had been exposed to crimes of human trafficking and child sexual abuse. They knew full well that a more horrendous case took place in 1988 when 16 people had been arrested and convicted of various offenses against children, including, but not limited to, child pornography. 3 of the people convicted were associated or were the heads of agencies that were supposed to help children, such as UNICEF, not hurting them. It turned out that the group was headquartered in Brussels, Belgium. In the cruelest world of human trafficking, the Dutroux case may pale in comparison to others that have been publicized and will probably surface in the near future. Recently, here in the United States, as well as Germany, law enforcement authorities have arrested numerous individuals and freed thousands of children from under the fist of human traffickers. It is not that this is a new practice. Slavery has been around since time immemorial. What is indeed shocking are the amount of lives chewed up and spit out as a result of the catering to an elite, depraved class who believe they are above the law. This begs the question, was Marc Dutroux merely a middleman for this deviant behavior? Or was he the epitome of evil that has plagued the nightmares of adults and children alike? Perhaps if there was some information that Dutroux could provide to authorities, at least to beg the forgiveness of God, then perhaps his redemption would be all but guaranteed. However, it is safe to say that any more confessions from this monster may be just self-serving in an attempt to lessen the sentence he has already received. Until next time. Hello everyone, this is Alan Gautreaux, your host of True Crime Man's Dark Imagination. If you would like to support our channel, you can become a member of Subscribestar. There are different levels, and subscribers get special privileges. Also, we do have a PayPal account. If you enjoy our work here, please think about subscribing. I will leave the links below in the comment section. We thank you very much for your viewing, and please stay tuned for future programs.